is the editor of Rolling Stone. So it's very excited that he's here speaking with Cal State LA's journalism program and specifically the University Times course and staff members of the student newspaper. So he is in charge of content, editorial strategy, operations. He basically manages all of editorial, right? So we're talking about editors, reporters, designers, producers, web producers. He oversees growth and innovation for Rolling Stone's website and its print magazine. And combined, they reach 60 million people a month. You know, this is a very big operation, right? Especially in the world of entertainment news. He has developed initiatives in short form, long form video, special interest publications on Rolling Stone themed subjects, branded documentaries, and TV and film projects. He was also editorial director of Men's Journal until July 2017, when it was purchased by another company. Since joining Rolling Stone as associate editor in 1997, he's had definitive interviews with Johnny Cash, country legend Merle Haggard, and the Beach Boys' Brian Wilson. In fact, his 2010 article on Haggard was chosen for the best writing anthology. And numerous stories that he edited while at Rolling Stone and Men's Journal have received ASME Awards, which is basically the top honor, and they're basically the National Magazine Awards, Ellie Awards, and nominations. And he's edited books on, Rolling Stone's books on Cash, George Harrison, Michael Jackson. He was editor-in-chief of Option Magazine, culture editor of San Francisco's Bay Guardian. And as a writer, he covered music, politics, pop culture for many publications, including the San Francisco Chronicle, the San Jose Mercury News, where I used to work, Jason.
I saw that. I noticed that.
Yeah. Spin, Travel and Leisure, East Bay Express. These are some of the other places he's written. He's also appeared, just on the media and talk shows and that kind of thing frequently to talk about music and pop culture as an expert on that. He's also been featured in documentaries like ones on Johnny Cash and Merle Haggard and Brian Wilson. His degrees are from UC Berkeley. All right, and he lives in New York City with his wife and son. So thank you so much for being here. Is there anything that you want to start off with?
I mean, I'm happy to do that. For me, being a journalist I was always a writer, always wanted to be a writer. It was one of the few things I felt I was really good at, the way of expressing myself when I was growing up. And becoming a journalist was sort of, like I said a few minutes ago, was sort of a way to avoid going to law school, basically, and a way to sort of interact with the communities where I was living and working. I was a big music fan. I was also really involved in politics when I was at UC Berkeley. And so I began writing about music and politics. And it was a way for me to get closer to those things and learn more about the people that worked in those areas, learn more about the way policies were formed and made. And it was, really became a thing where, at least at Berkeley, and you guys probably feel this now, you can make a difference, and that is a really powerful thing to be able to do, to write an article that influences the way that people behave or act or do something differently, or learn about something they didn't know about. And, one of the things when I talk to classes, and I've talked over the years, is a lot of people ask about, how do you make a career doing this? And is it worth it? And are there going to be jobs and all that kind of stuff? And for a long time, I sort of felt like, wow, I mean, I don't know where this is going. It's a great thing to do, to be a journalist, but is there going to be a future in it? But in the last, I would say, especially since Trump got elected, but even right now, I think we're feeling it a lot more in the middle of this crisis. People are reinventing themselves. Facts are really important. Science is really important. The truth is really important. Telling stories of humanity is really important. So to me, this is a time that sort of reaffirms why we do this, what we do it for, the importance of journalists in our culture. I mean, if you saw Trump's press conference just the other day, demeaning and belittling journalists. We have a valuable and very, very crucial role in our society that has been demeaned and belittled. And we have an opportunity, I think, to tell stories that are critical to us going forward. It's interesting. We're here on this class, right? And you guys are all at home, and I'm at home with my son. And we had sort of built this scaffolding, I think, around real life, right? With the internet and Zoom and Slack and all this stuff, all these ways of communicating. And thank God we had it, because now we're able to use it. And when we go back into the real world, I think these tools are going to be even more valuable than they are right now. My main message is one of hope and optimism for, the world needs you as journalists.
So kind of like going along the lines of saying like, it's kind of hard to see like a future in journalism sometimes, because you can tell like, it's not that it's not important, but sometimes I feel like people don't understand like the hard copy of what it really is. So I was going to ask, when you did realize that journalism was a route you wanted to take, did your family approve of that?
Yeah, they did. Look, you certainly don't get into it for the money. There's a lot easier ways to make money than being a journalist. But, my father was a professor at Cal State Long Beach, and my mom is a musician. And so I sort of landed in the middle, being a music journalist. And so, yeah, they approved. I think they probably approved of me doing anything, valuable with my life. And certainly the things that I write about and the orientation that I've tried to bring to journalism, they valued. So yes, they were supportive. It's hard for people who don't do what we do necessarily to understand what goes into it. You don't need to have a degree to be a journalist, for example. Anyone can do it, but not anyone can be good at it. And it requires the same kind of skill, dedication, and hard work that anything does to be good at. And as soon as you have some success, I'm sure they'll come around.
How do you build a trust and a connection right away, especially with a new person, and say they're in a hurry and you're trying to have them have a follow-up interview with you? And so if they only have that 5 minutes, but you want an hour, 2-hour session with them, how do you build that trust right away? And how do you ask the correct questions to have them feel, okay, I could make time for you?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I mean, if you only have 5 minutes, that's a challenge. But, I think the understanding your subject, having specific questions that show that you have background, that you've done your homework, that you're bringing some intelligence to it, that you're asking questions that are specifically related to what that person does or what they're trying to do. Or if it's a challenge, I don't think that's a problem either. I think show that you're serious, show that you're prepared. I think that, that and be personable, you know what I mean? Like your goal isn't to be friends with that person, but your goal is to have a good rapport with that person. And that hopefully will build trust as well and get you more time. What I will oftentimes do is, say you have 5 minutes, get about 3 minutes in, build a little bit of, you see the person's body language loosening up, a little laughter, something like that, and say this, I know we only have 2 more minutes, but I have a lot more questions, a lot more things I'd like to talk to you about. Would it be possible that we could continue this at another time?
During this time, especially, you can't do in-person interviews. And so trying to do a profile through text messages and emails, that's already hard enough. That's very hard because you don't get to see the person themselves, but also you don't get to hear their tone. You don't see their gesture. So, and doing a profile, you need to ask those personal questions because you're trying to give a story and not just get quotes from people. Yeah, and so sure. It's very difficult because my transition right now of trying to ask people about living situations, how hard it is, how hard the whole transition from in class to online, all that stuff. And so I can't tell if I'm going beyond their boundaries of asking them simple questions like how's your housing situation. I feel like that's a personal question.
Have you tried to do some of those interviews over Zoom?
I've tried. It would be I'm more comfortable with emails or text messages, which is great and cool because then it gives them the opportunity to write whatever, but it does not give me the opportunity to tell them, can you elaborate more or whatever?
You need to start on the phone and then hopefully you can build to a video thing. I mean, the awesome thing, obviously, I mean, for us, and we face this every day, is, a lot of even our cover stories and things like that, which we're needing to report now over Zoom and phone and text and stuff like that. The awesome thing about it is it gives you access to people in their own environment, in their home. People have all the time in the world right now, number one. And number two, like I see where you live, whereas like Bad Bunny wasn't going to invite me to his house last week, but now, I'm in his living room with him, so there are opportunities in this that I think that you can take advantage of. And I think people are also, they have time and they're kind of looking for that connection.
This isn't my personal question, but I mean, it's
Okay.
still good information to know. Hi, by the way. So another student asked, how long does it take to report out and write some of the profile stories you've written? And how many questions do you usually come up with before heading to the interview? So that kind of like adds on to Kilmer's.
Yeah, those are good questions. It depends, you know, in terms of questions, in terms of being prepared, I sort of, for whatever reason, sort of aim to have 50 questions. I don't always use them. I don't always go for them, but they sort of help me frame the kinds of things that I want to talk about. If it's going to be sort of something longer and in depth, I do that, and I even kind of script it out. So I have them kind of in different categories. And so if I ask a question, say about, say I ask someone about some political thing and clearly they don't want to go down that road, I might have a question then that goes in a different direction, versus if they do want to go down that road, I can ask deeper questions on that subject. It's very rare in an actual interview, unless it's on the phone. If it's on the phone, you can sit and look at your questions, but it's very rare if I'm in person with someone that I'll even ever look at my questions. But what I will do is, after about a half an hour or something like that, run to the bathroom, look at my questions, make sure I'm asking the things that I was supposed to ask, you know, or I'll even run to the bathroom and take some notes really fast, things I don't want to forget. Because you'll find that when you're in the experience, especially if it's with a celebrity or somebody like that, where there's a lot of noise around them, you're so in the moment that you kind of, you might forget a lot of things. So I always try and take a minute, take some notes, sort of regroup and come back. But about 50 questions. In terms of time for a story, I mean, I don't know, man. It could take 2 years. It could take a week. I mean, it could be anything depending on what the story is. I'm sure you guys didn't read it because it was really long, but that Merle Haggard story was like, it kept changing, you know, like the facts kept changing. The first time I went to see him, he wouldn't let me come to his house. Then the second time he was quitting touring. Then the third time he decided to go back to touring. Then the fourth time he got cancer. The fifth time he got, you know, so the story just kept changing. So I kept having to go back. So that took a long time. But, you know, like we did a big piece on Governor Cuomo from New York, which is the new cover story in the issue that's coming out in Rolling Stone. The piece is online now if you want to see it. But the guy who wrote that, who's really one of my favorite interviewers and journalists in the world, named Mark Bonelli, he did it in 3 days. So it can be done. I'm slow, but you can maybe be fast.
I kind of have a follow-up question to that.
Yeah.
So you said like when you meet like the artists and stuff, do you ever get like starstruck and like have to realize that you're doing this for your job and like you have to create that boundary? Or like, do you create a boundary between like friendship with them and like trying to get your work done?
Yeah, it's a weird thing. I mean, do you know who Joan Didion is?
Mm-hmm.
She was a great journalist and California writer. She's still alive. She's still writing. She's amazing. And she said, she wrote this essay, I think it's in the White Album, which is a collection of her journalism. And she said, a journalist is always trying to sell someone out, you know? And I mean, that's a very cynical thing to say, but there is some truth in it. Part of your job, if you're writing a profile of someone, is to get them to like you, or at least feel comfortable with you. They might not like you at all, but they feel like they have someone they can have rapport with, right? So there is kind of always a line that you have to walk there. You are there to do a job, but especially if you're writing about, maybe like in my case, you know, with Brian Wilson, I was like the biggest Beach Boys fan in the world growing up, and then I got to go to Brian Wilson's house and meet him, and that was probably the only time I really ever felt really nervous. You know, ringing that doorbell in Beverly Hills, and it was just like, but you kind of get over that because you do have a job to do, and that's, you know, that's what you're there to do. So as a journalist, I think what you should feel more is you feel the privilege of getting to be in that situation, being in the mix, being in places that regular people don't go, but your job is to report that back.
What is the most challenging interview or interviews you've had to conduct, and how did you manage to get it done? And then how did the final article or articles turn out?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I can tell you a story. It's sad, but it turned out pretty well. I wanted to write about Johnny Cash, and it was not long before he died. And I went to Nashville and I went to his house, and I wasn't really sure what to expect when I got there, but I definitely didn't expect what happened, which was I walked into this big mansion. There was really kind of no one around. Someone said, "Oh, you might be down there. Go look down there." And I walked down this long corridor and through these these gaudy Nashville rooms with blue velvet drapes and all this stuff into this little tiny room that was like the size, I don't know, like smaller than a kid's bedroom with like bunks in it. It looked like the back of a tour bus. And he was in there and I barely recognized him. I mean, he had gotten so old and he looked so unhealthy and out of focus. And I sort of had to introduce myself to 2 or 3 times to get his attention. And I started talking to him. And after about 15 minutes, I realized like, I just shouldn't be here. Like, this is not good. I'm certainly not getting my story, but I'm also like, he's not healthy enough for this. This is almost exploitative or something. So I was feeling really bad. And I decided to cut the interview off. And I left, and I hadn't had any kind of experience like this before. And I went back to my hotel and I was pretty shaken up, and I just felt mostly bad. I felt bad that I'd come all this way and not gotten my story, but mostly I felt bad that I'd sort of taken this guy's strength and energy at a time when he didn't have it. I was kind of packing up to go to the airport and just started getting my head around what happened, and the phone rang. And I picked up the phone, and the voice said, exactly like you'd imagine it, "This is Johnny Cash." And I was like, oh my God. And he said, "I'm really sorry for what happened today. Would you mind coming back tomorrow and trying again?" And I said, of course, if it's okay with you, I will. So I went back the next morning. He was in a totally different frame of mind. He was ready to go. He remembered things I'd asked him that he wasn't able to answer the day before. And we had this like kind of incredible hour-long interview that ended with him inviting me to breakfast upstairs with him and June Carter Cash. And we had this elaborate breakfast, and it turned out really well. And I wrote about it, pretty honestly. And for me as a journalist, that was really hard. It was hard to understand like how to convey him in this fragile place, this guy that everyone thought of as this sort of American icon. And I did the best I could, but it was really challenging. I'm glad it turned out that way, and he didn't make it that much longer. I wrote actually a little bit of a longer version of it. We did a book. So I wrote a story for Rolling Stone about it that was pretty fast. And then we did a book about Johnny Cash after he passed. And I wrote a longer version of that. The guy had so much integrity, and he'd worked so hard for everything he had. I think in his mind, it was just like, I didn't get that job done, and I need to get that job done. You know what I mean? I think to the end, he just had that kind of focus. So I think it was kind of less about me.
And I also read the article you did on Merle Haggard, and it was interesting that he said that he snuck into the hospital to say goodbye to Johnny Cash, wearing a doctor's coat. Like, I thought that was like kind of badass. I was like, wow.
What was one of the most surprising skills that you accumulated or that you learned that kind of propelled you into your editor's position that you didn't realize that you needed to begin with?
Right. Okay. Well, there's a couple things, but the first thing I would say, it didn't propel me into the editor's position, but the thing that I learned the most, and that I think that everyone needs to learn, is to listen better. I don't know how you guys do transcribe your interviews, if you do them yourself or if you send them out to services, but if you do them yourself, at least for me, when I used to do them for myself, and I still do, but I never listened. Like, I would just start talking, and it was like insane. The person would be about to say something great, and I would cut them off because I thought I had some brilliant insight, and it was so bad. So, I just really learned, one of the first things I learned was just shut up and just let people talk, And another thing which is really useful is oftentimes if someone stops talking, but they haven't given you like the answer that you hope they would, just don't say anything, because it's going to make them nervous, and then they're going to talk more. That's like, psychologists do that too, but it's a good trick. In terms of becoming an editor, I mean, for me, always the thing was, do I want to be a writer or do I want to be an editor? And I think all editors have that, you know, that conflict. Most editors want to be writers, but being a writer is way harder than being an editor. So I think that to become an editor, the first thing that's really important is to let go of that writer's ego and be okay with making other people's work shine rather than your own. And then I think managing people, you know, understanding that not everyone, like not all you guys are good at the same things, but together you probably do something that you couldn't do on your own. And so understanding, it's like being a coach, right? Understanding how the team fits together is crucial to being a great editor. One of the things that, I mean, I didn't go to school to learn that. No one taught me to do that. But at Rolling Stone, I think I've been good at building teams that really work well together and complement each other. Even when we're at each other's throats, usually everyone respects the other person's point of view, and usually we build on it to create something good together. So, you know, I have been known to say that, like, the magazine is not a democracy. You know, it's like we all don't have an equal say, but everyone does have a say, if not an equal vote. You know, it's like we should all be heard. And then those of us who make those decisions, which ultimately come down to me, we make those decisions, but not without input from everyone.
I was reading your Wilson's piece, and I found it interesting how, you know, he's sushi a lot. And you know, me being a coach and previous athlete, like we've gone to like pregame rituals, what we call it, you know. Even as a journalist, you know, I've covered sports, politics, health, finance. I've covered a lot of things. I've had my pregame ritual of, you know, wearing a windbreaker and getting coffee. And so my question to you was, you know, what would be your pregame ritual? Is there something specifically that you do that, you know, you have to do before going to an interview or writing like a story or something that helps you kind of get the nerves out the way?
I definitely get nervous. I try and take that as a good sign, take it as a sign that I care and that I want to do a good job, as opposed to, you know, that I'm stressed out. For me, if I drink too much coffee, I'm in trouble. I'll get more nervous. So a little less coffee for me. There's nothing really in particular. Getting there early is important to me. You know, I mean, oftentimes I'll be seen, like, even that Brian Wilson story, you know, lurking around Beverly Hills, you know, like for a while because I got there so early. But there's nothing really, you know, I mean, be prepared. That's kind of what it comes down to. Be ready, you know what it is you want to come away with. Have a vision in your mind of how things go. And so when it doesn't go that way, which it never does, you're kind of ready for anything.
You're responsible for publishing the unvarnished truth about these really complicated figures who have these sort of dodgy reputations sometimes, and the stuff they do behind the scenes is often different from how they portray themselves to the public. So how do you balance that line between being honest about who these people really are, and if they have objections to who they are behind the scenes, how do you hold yourself to this journalistic standard of your own journalistic integrity, but also respect who these people are as individuals?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question, and that's a really tricky thing, you know, and that's sort of what we were talking about earlier, I think, at the beginning, was that, you know, we don't have degrees in this job, we don't have licenses, but we do have sort of an oath of being responsible and having integrity. If somebody, say you were interviewing, said something that could cause someone else harm, or could be, you know, could be criminal, or could have some really negative implications, it would probably be your job to write that and report that. If it was something where somebody has a bad habits, you know, I've run into lots of musicians, at least, you know, with really bad habits. You don't necessarily need to expose that, right? Some people are more adept at saying, oh, this is on the record, this is off record. Some people get carried away and you know, shoot themselves in the foot. And I mean, you don't, you know, you try and protect people where you can, I guess, is what it comes down to. It depends on how material whatever that subject matter is to the story. I'll tell you one just incident like that And there have been lots of them. I mean, there have been lots of people have told me things that were tragic or sad or self-destructive or whatever, but they weren't, there was no reason to expose that, right? There was no greater good that was going to be served by that. So you sort of just because you have it doesn't mean you have to use it. In some cases, there was a band, I won't say who it was, but there was a band that I wrote about in the maybe 15 years ago. It was a popular band at the time. And the guy was super self-destructive and was like just on a tear the entire time we were together. And there was no way to write the story in which he came off as just like an angel. But I also protected him from a lot of the worst stuff that he did and said and talked about. He still like went after me for it and said that I'd made all this stuff up, you know, and you sort of like, oh God, like if he only knew. But I think that to me, that maybe is where it comes down to, like, you know, are you being salacious or are you telling a story that needs to be told?
Out of all the articles and stories that you've written, which one was your favorite one to do and why, obviously?
Well, my favorite one is ongoing because the Brian Wilson story that I think I sent to you guys was sort of one of many that I've done. And me growing up in Southern California, the Beach Boys were like a big thing for me growing up, even though they were even old then, even though they're really old now. But Brian and his struggles with mental illness and also his ability to kind of endure all that he's had to endure through his life and make these beautiful melodies for people was just always a really inspiring thing to me. And so the ability to kind of cover his career, at least for the last 20 years, 25 years, has been like really, really special to me. And so the story that I sent was sort of the latest, but there have been many, many before that. And hopefully there will be many more. In fact, I just finished a documentary film about Brian, which is really cool. It's called Long Promised Road. It'll come out in the next couple months. I love that guy. I love the fact that through all that he's been through these years of misdiagnosis and mental illness and drug abuse and people treating him really badly, he still has this desire, this courage to go on and make music, you know, that makes people feel better about themselves. And so that's kind of probably the favorite storyline that I've followed for a long time.
I'm currently starting, first ever journalism course at a high school that I'm working in right now.
Awesome.
My question for you is Trump belittling journalists, and these kids see that, and a lot of their questions is, why join journalism? What else do you think is important for young high school kids to understand when learning about journalism and why it's important to them and, why they should get into it?
If they feel unfairness, if they feel that certain people are treated differently than other people, if they feel like there's some need for a voice, journalism is a great place to express that. Journalism is a great place to fight for bigger causes than yourself. Journalism is a great place to fight for change. I don't think most people go into journalism because they're complacent. Most people are curious. Most people want to know how does the world work? Why is it this way? Does it need to be this way? How is it changing? Anyone who's curious about, we're living through this time. I mean, obviously right now in the coronavirus, but more broadly, through this time of really, really fast change in the ways we live, the ways we communicate, the ways politics works, everything. And that's, if they have questions, the one of the great things about journalism is you have a license to go and ask anybody anything. So if you want to get in people's face and ask questions, being a journalist is a great thing to do too.
How do you feel about gaming journalism as of today compared to like a decade ago?
Right. I don't have a lot of personal insight into gaming journalists or gaming journalism, except to know that gaming is a bigger and more important part of our culture and our pop culture than it's ever been. And so people who report on it seriously, who understand it, are super valuable. And I think that it's probably a really good field for serious journalism, because I don't think traditionally serious journalists have gone into gaming as much as they should. Seems like a great opportunity.